Good morning to everyone. Good morning to those that are watching, maybe on Facebook or online. We appreciate you joining us. Please join us for worship service as well. And you're welcome to join us anytime during our Sunday school time. Today we are in the book of Genesis. We are going to be reading Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 22. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Okay. So in just kind of the introduction section, it talks about how, how we travel different paths. You know, on our journey, we meet different people, and sometimes the people that we meet can cause us to maybe take a different road, maybe a road less traveled. Sometimes we're faced with temptations of like envy, pride, indifference, contempt, and sometimes those things can kind of derail us and kind of send us off on a different mission. Or it's just, if we're at a very vulnerable time in our lives, we might just take things maybe the wrong way, or there's just different things that happen to us from day to day. Sometimes moments of despair and a sense of defeat can overtake us, and we start looking for that exit ramp. And we feel like maybe we just need something different. When we go through painful experiences, we may think they're unique, but as we study so much in the Old Testament, we know that there were so many characters that faced all kinds of situations. And a lot of them were bad situations, but God was with them, and God was helping them even in a bad time. Today we're studying about a descendant of Abraham, and that is Jacob. And we just read the story of Jacob here. Genesis 12, 1 through 3 begins the account of a family chosen to be a conduit of blessings to all nations. And we don't know why God chose this family. It certainly wasn't because they were without flaw. They had many flaws, and they were not perfect. But then again, none of us are perfect. We're all humans, and we've all sinned. We all have done wrong, and none of us have lived a perfect life. But God looks at us, and he takes away our sins, and he doesn't remind us of the things we've done wrong. He praises us, and he wants us to go on, and he wants us to work for him. So we mentioned that we're talking about Jacob. So Jacob swindled his brother Esau out of his birthright. And this had already taken place. He deceived his father Isaac and taken Esau's blessing. If you remember, Esau was the older son, and he was supposed to get the blessing and the birthright, and Jacob swindled and tricked his father. And then later Jacob was actually tricked by his father-in-law Laban. Jacob tricked Laban in return with even more deceit following. And if you'd like to read this is still in Genesis 29, 30, and 31. If you kind of want to just read more about that background, it's really, I think it's been always an interesting story to me about how it all transpired. So Jacob was on the run. His mother had helped him with conspiring and helping him do this self-exile so that he could get away from his brother, because his brother Esau was going to try to kill him. So his mother actually helped him get away, and we're taking off now today in today's text where he's actually on this journey. Ultimately, Jacob's story is not about a search for God, but God's search for him. When found on a physical journey, Jacob began a spiritual journey as well. So in verse 10, and that was chapter 28, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. So Beersheba is a town in southern Canaan where Jacob's father Isaac eventually settled following a series of disputes with the Philistines over the ownership of certain wells. Jacob's destination of Haran is where Jacob's grandfather Abraham, which he was called Abram at the time, he lived there before he left for Canaan. A journey from Beersheba to Haran would be about 550 miles. And walking at a pace of 2 miles per hour, it would have taken over a month to complete. And we know that, he was having to stop and rest at night. And so, of course, it wasn't just like us getting in a car and just driving. It was on foot, and he certainly had to stop for rest. Verse 11a, when he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. The name of this certain place was called Luz, L-U-Z. I guess that's the way you pronounce it, I'm not sure. It was about 60 miles north of Beersheba, so it took Jacob a few days to reach that point in his journey. 11b, taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. So, we imagine it'd be kind of hard to rest with a stone under your head. But I know from working night shift, there were days I got off and I think I could have slept on a whole bed of rocks. I was so tired just from being up all night. So he probably felt the same way. It was just something to kind of elevate his head off the ground, basically. Verse 12. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. So we know that dreams were very important, and we hear about dreams throughout the Old Testament, and especially during this time with Jacob, Laban, and then later Joseph. We know that the dreams sent by God were very important. The stairway it doesn't go into a lot of detail about it. Some Bible scholars believe that it looked kind of like a pyramid, and they call it a ziggurat. It resembled a pyramid, and then at the top it had a platform. And on that platform, maybe an offering could be made, or someone could have stood on the very top. I think that would have been dangerous, but it was some type of figure that probably looked a little bit like a pyramid. And so, angels are God's messengers. And so Jacob sees the angels on the stairway. But then he sees that God is actually at the top. Verse 13, there above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. So, as we mentioned, the Lord was there, and the Lord was actually talking directly to Jacob. The angels were there also, but it was God that was speaking directly to him. And, of course, he introduces himself. He says, I am the Lord. And he says, the God of your father Abraham. And the commentary brings out, they weren't sure why he said it that way, because Abraham was actually Jacob's grandfather, and Isaac was his father. But, it goes way back. It talks about an affirmation was likely intended to provide, among other things, much needed assurance to Jacob. After all, he was leaving the territory of the land of promise on his way to Haran, the exact reverse of the trip Abraham took. So Jacob was needing reassurance, and the Lord was giving him that reassurance that he was with him. So we know that the word father is used. It's kind of a word that's used like ancestor or forefather, and that's why a lot of Bible scholars believe that that's the reason the Lord said it that way. There's nothing here about God bringing up the deceptive things that Jacob had done. God was not here to punish Jacob at this time, and he wasn't bringing up the bad things that had gone on with Jacob. He was there reaffirming, I'm with you, Jacob. I'm here, and I'm going to be with you. That's what he says. And your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. So God's going to be with Jacob spiritually and physically. He's going to provide for him. And then he also says, I'm going to bless your descendants. There will be many, many descendants from you. So we know, since he says it like this, that Jacob is going to have a wife and at least one child if there's going to be descendants. We know, just reading on, that he has more children than just one, but he knows at this point that he's going to have at least a wife and at least one child. Okay, so just thinking about the word dust, it talks about the dust of the earth. So dust could be kind of thought of as a negative thing, or it could be thought of as a positive thing. If you think about all the little particles of dust, and you think about that being all over the place, east, west, north, south, that's covering a whole area. And that's what God is promising. And it's important to us, too, because Abraham was considered the father of all Christians, and we're all Christians. So we are all part of this family of descendants. Verse 15a, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. This is very reassuring. When God says, I am with you, that's great. that's something that you feel like, okay, I guess I can face tomorrow. I can move on. I can move on into the next day or the next week if I know that God's going to be there helping me through whatever it is I'm going through. And that's how Jacob was. He was reassured at this time. Verse 15b, I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. And it says that, some, when you see the word, no, that's in another spot, I'm sorry. The word until does not imply that the Lord would abandon Jacob at some future date. It just means that God's will be done through Jacob throughout his life. Verse 16, when Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. So it seems like Jacob probably woke up right after this dream, and then he realized that this spot he thought was just a very ordinary spot to lie down and rest. But now he thinks this is not any ordinary spot. This spot is very important because God is in this place. And it also brings out how Moses later, could have just been in an ordinary spot, but then all of a sudden, he sees a burning bush. So many times God was with these Bible characters in just very ordinary spots. Verse 17, he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. So he was a little bit afraid. I think in our society or whatever, we use the word awesome to mean, oh, that's great, or that's wonderful, or that's special. But in this case, the word awesome is actually translated as afraid. So Jacob was afraid. And it says that he was speaking out loud. There was no one else with him, so he was just speaking out loud to God. Verse 18a, early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar. And the commentary brings out that standing stones were very common in the ancient world. In Canaan, oftentimes they were used for pagan worship, which was not good, but they could also be used as a memorial. And Jacob placed the stone, he stood it upright, and when he did that was different because it was like a memorial to what had just happened in this spot. Talking about memorials, we have an insert and it talks about the Washington Monument. It's the tallest obelisk in the world, the height of 555 feet. It commemorates George Washington, the most famous of all the founders of the United States. The monument is an impressive acknowledgement indeed. In contrast, what Jacob had was a small pillar. It kind of seemed maybe like an insult, but it wasn't an insult because the size didn't matter. It was the meaning of it. It was that special memorial that he was placing there because of this interaction that he'd had with God. When he returned to this area years later, we wonder if he found that stone still standing. Even assuming he did not, he doubtlessly carried the memory of that monument and what it represented. Monuments help remind us of episodes of God's grace. And it mentions, like, when the church was renovated, and the sanctuary became different, or we built the Family Life Center. Those are buildings that are very special to us, and they're places where we worship God. And back then, maybe they only had a stone or something. Now we have so many ways that we can help ourselves to remember what we've seen. It could be a video. How many times now do we make a video of something? Or how many times do we make pictures? And so nowadays we have so many more ways that we can help ourselves remember special things in our life, special events or special places. But they are especially special, I guess. It's kind of a lot of specials, but it's very special when God is part of whatever's going on. So, if God is part of our lives and he's part, just like part of this church, he's always with us here, then that makes it very special to us. 18b, and he poured oil on top of it. So a lot of times, oil would be placed on kings or priests, and it was a way to anoint them. But oil could also be placed on objects, and that's what Jacob did by pouring the oil on this stone. He was consecrating that stone. Verse 19, he called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. The Hebrew word for Bethel means house of God, and they said that the word Bethel is mentioned many times in the Old Testament, like dozens of times. Negatively, Bethel became a site where Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom of divided Israel, built one of his golden calves to keep the people from going to Jerusalem to worship at the temple there. Later, that was about 930 BC. That was 10 centuries after the time of Jacob. And that's when there was a lot of idolatrous altar worship and that kind of thing going on. But then 3 centuries later, King Josiah destroyed that area where they were actually offering the idolatrous things on the altar. It says that archaeologists have not been able to determine the location of Bethel with certainty. They believe that it's maybe located within a village known as Beton. That's Beiten. Verse 20 and 21. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taken, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household. 21b, then the Lord will be my God. So Jacob is kind of now saying, well, if God's going to be with me and he's going to do all these things for me, then then I know the Lord is with me, and then I'm going to be his. I'm going to do as he directs me to do. And it's very reassuring for Jacob, because I'm sure he thought, I might get killed on this journey. I may never make it to the spot where I'm supposed to go. But he knew if God was with him, he would make it, and he would be safe. We have to remember, too, that Jacob was very young in his Christian journey, or in his journey with God. So at first, I think he needed this reassurance that God would be with him. And, the Lord will be on my side. The Lord will be my God. That relationship, would end up going much farther as the time goes on, as the years go on. He would become much closer to God. Verse 22, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. So at this time, Jacob didn't have much. All he had was what he had with him. But many years later, Jacob, would be very wealthy, and he would have much money that he could give back to God. It talks about the Israelite practice, and what they would do is they would collect their tithes, and then they would give it for temple support. They would help feed the poor. They would help those people that were vulnerable. It could be that people were giving fruits, crops that they had, meat, but sharing them was a way that they were sharing the bounty that God had given them. How was Jacob to distribute his tithes? The text does not say. The story may show him as a model for the future Israelites who would have both a mechanism and a purpose for distributing their tithes. So, in conclusion, God surprised Jacob with a vision of magnitude of mercy that the young man would receive in life. Although Jacob would face many future problems, often of his own making, his life went on to be marked by God's merciful provisions. In the big picture view, Jacob was to be a key man through whom the ancient promises to his ancestors were to come to fruition. But in addition to that big picture, there's a more personal one. The story doesn't feature Jacob's search for God, but rather it features God's search for him. After being found, Jacob had to begin viewing his life differently, searching for the meaning of what he had experienced. That search lasted the rest of his life. And I think that's very common for us too. You know, when we accept Jesus as our Savior, then our lives do change. We have that assurance that Jesus is always with us. And in return, we feel like that we want to do things for others. We want to do what God would have us to do. Sometimes we struggle to know our place in the big picture. You know, where do we fit in? What does God really want us to do? I think we have to always be listening, and we have to be open to any situation that we might find ourselves in, to where we can follow through with God's plan. Regardless of the situation of life, the primary question per Luke 17:10 is this: what is my duty in my current situation? So I think oftentimes we do just find ourselves asking that question: what is my duty, and what is my purpose? And then how do I do the duty that I'm asked to do? I'd just like to finish with this prayer because I thought it was good. God of our ancestors, in faith we thank you for abiding with us generation after generation. You seek us when we don't seek you. Abide with us still and help us to abide with you. In Jesus' name, amen. I hope y'all have a great week. Would anybody like to add anything? Well, thank you for coming out today, and thank you for listening online. And join us again for our service in just a few moments.